Alright, let's get straight into it. So this build is somewhat modular, and we'll just talk about the different options we've got here. Option 1 for melee is going to be the combat blade. This is what I recommend, really. I think it's maybe better overall than the crusher, which is the second weapon I recommend. Um, I shouldn't say it's better overall because the Crusher is probably the stronger weapon. It just doesn't synergize with our build quite as well. And that's because it has a slower attack speed and it has a lower crit chance. And so we really want to have, really high crit chance with this build to make use of our talents. And the Combat Blade in particular is very good at that. Now, a lot of people think the tactical axe is synonymous of combat blades, and it kind of is, so if you've got a god roll of this, then that's fine too. I just find that the combat blade is an easier weapon to use and therefore, more reliable. So that's why it's what I recommend. If you prefer the idea of using an axe, then I guess that's fine. For, modifiers here, the dump stat is mobility, but you do want your mobility to still be high. So really, this is a somewhat difficult weapon to get a good roll on. You do need a good total modifier, and then that allows you to still have decent mobility. The reason mobility is important is because part of what makes this weapon strong is the fact that you can just zoom around. And zooming around is really important for the build because we need to close ground when we're out in the open, in particular when we're dealing with gunners on the back line of the enemy. We don't want to get, stranded in the open while they're all, shooting us. And so mobility will help avoid that. For perks, we want crit chance. Absolutely, you really want crit chance on this. And then crit damage is not a bad pick. You could go flak, you could go carapace, you could go unyielding. One of those three for the second slot. And for blessings, you want riposte, and I would say either flesh terror or executor. There is also one that gives finesse damage, but I find Executor is going to be just as effective. This is a multiplicative buff and is very easy to proc. You can do this against a single enemy. You don't need to have, multiple enemies attacking you. And it's going to happen whether you crit or not. Now, we are going to reach, very high crit chance with this build. So you are going to be critting most of the time, and this is also going to increase your crit damage. So this is just good no matter what. And riposte is just, 6 seconds of 20% crit chance. It's really good. Uh, Now the bleeds, a lot of people think the bleed is really fucking strong, and I don't want to shit on anyone, right? But if we look at this scoreboard here, you can see my bleed damage. I did less than 10% of my overall damage as bleeds. It is nice, it does help you reach some breakpoints. If you crit on a Poxwalker, then it's just gonna die from the bleeds. Now, if you don't know, the Combat Blade will have a cleave of 3 against Poxwalkers. The first enemy will take a decent chunk of damage, but the next two will take basically no damage. They do, however, still receive a crit, which means they still get those bleed stacks. And so that's still going to do, that is going to give the bleed, an opportunity to do quite a lot of damage to those enemies in particular. The problem is you attack so fast with this that the bleed doesn't really have time to tick away and kill them, especially when you're just fighting a horde. Um, it helps a little bit, but it clearly, based on this number, does not make that much of a difference. Whereas just grabbing straight up power is going to help you in more scenarios. It's going to help you with bosses. It's going to help you with everything. Um, so yeah, that is the trade-off. I think it is worth trying both. But I am finding it difficult to tell which is better, which probably means that they're about the same, and so it doesn't really matter what you pick. Now, moving on to the next weapon, the Crusher. This weapon is really good because instead of high mobility, you go for high stagger with this. It means you can deal with stuff like crushers, bulwarks, ragers in a more direct manner, let's say. You can just stagger them and just beat the shit out of them, which is nice. It's a lot easier to do, to deal with those things with this weapon. In particular, bulwarks, right? Bulwarks are one enemy that can be difficult to deal with. Even with the combat blade and all of its mobility, it's not always that easy to get around them, especially when there's a big group of them. But this weapon doesn't have that problem. One of the clutches that I'm going to include I'll put a link in the video's description to another video, and I'll have some clutches in there with this build and a full Auric Damnation run as well. The Auric Damnation is a duo run, so it is, fairly challenging. Um, and yeah, you can kind of get an idea of how the build performs. And one of the clips, one of the clutches, I kill like maybe 6 or so bulwarks with the crusher, and it's just so easy to do, and ragers as well. Um, so our modifiers here, the dump stat is defenses. Now you might read those and think that crowd control or power outputs are not super important, but they really are. Crowd control is attack speed, cleave, and stagger. So, I know a lot of people think stagger sucks, but it doesn't. All three of those are super important. And then power output is going to be the size of the AoE when you use the charged attack, as well as the damage from it. So that's also super important. The reason why the size matters, even though it's small, is that if you've got 3 or 4 bulwarks next to each other, if you get a charged attack out on one of them, they're all going to get staggered by it. That's really good. So that matters, and crowd control matters. Whereas defenses really is just a little bit of dodge range and dodge speed, which, like, who cares? Perks, crit chance, damage flak is good, damage carapace is good, damage unyielding is good. Um, yeah, that's what I would go for there. For your blessings, I would say Skull Crusher is the only damage blessing for this weapon, so you definitely want that. And then all the other blessings on this weapon are going to be stagger related. So really that doesn't matter so much. Thunder Strike here is fine, for example. So yeah, not the hardest weapon to get a good roll on, really. And that is it for the Crusher. Let's talk about our ranged gear. Now, here I really only recommend grabbing the Revolver. It's just so much better than every single other ranged weapon we have. Now, I'll say the Flamer is also an extremely powerful weapon, but it's just good for something else, right? It's a different use case. But we use the ranged weapon for dealing with specials, and maybe getting a little burst of damage on an elite or something like that. And so the revolver is the absolute king of that type of damage. It is very quick to switch to and from. It does a huge amount of damage. It has high crit chance. Um, it's very precise, even at long ranges. It's a perfect weapon almost. The reason I say almost is it doesn't quite hit some breakpoints. I would prefer if it could one tap more enemies. And with a perfect roll, you can get those one taps, but I'm still hunting for that. If we look at the damage profile for this one, what we're looking at is going to be criticals because we're going to be pretty much sitting at 100% crit chance with this thing. So, critical here, you can one tap body shot a lot of enemies. You can one tap headshots almost all enemies. And so, pretty much if you fire 2 shots at anything, it's going to be dead. The only exception is going to be Ogren enemies and bosses. To make that happen, we want to grab for our perks crit chance. You could skip the crit chance on this one, to be honest. You could go for like Maniac and Carapace or even potentially Flak. You don't necessarily need Flak because, you know, if you've got a perfect roll, you will one tap most Flak enemies. But you could grab Flak just to kind of, you know, make sure, and because I think the vast majority of people won't have a perfect roll. Um, so yeah, just Flak is good. Maniac might be good. I don't think it is. You won't be one-tapping trappers, and that's the only reason you would really grab Maniac, because we can already one-tap mutants with our dagger and with our crusher. So our ranged weapon isn't used for mutants. And so, you know, the only, you know, the flamer we can also one tap, or can we? I think with a perfect roll you could. Maniac could be worth grabbing. Um, Carapace is nice because we can do some pretty decent damage to crushers. With this roll here, I can kill crushers in 2 taps if I use my combat ability, or 4 taps if I don't. And then for blessings, you want surgical and point blank. Surgical, I'll show you right now how quickly this stacks. So if you look underneath my health bar, when I start aiming, there's a buff that shows up. I want you to look at that buff and look at how quickly the stacks increase. And every time that stack increases is another 10% crit chance. It is crazy fast. So, well, that was unlucky. But yeah, it's very, very strong. Even in combat, I mean, that's not that long of a time to aim, right? There I had like 2 stacks. So it is worth using. And then when you're outside of combat, you can always guarantee you're gonna land a crit, which is good because that means you're conserving ammo. And it's not just about the damage increase, it's also about ammo consumption. And then point blank, when you're in combat, if you're, you know, fully hoarded, and a special shows up and you really just need to deal with it, well, you're guaranteed to have point blank up because on melee kill you'll get 20% crit chance. So you're guaranteed, even if you're like the fastest shot, to get 20% crit chance thanks to that. So, you know, pretty awesome combo there with the blessings. And this is going to ensure you do crazy damage with your revolver. Another reason why the revolver is so good, let me turn the AI off. Is because it pierces. So we'll put a flamer back there. Right? He's a 2-tap no matter what. We didn't lose a breakpoint there. But yeah, shooting through the enemies is not a problem, and the reason that matters is if you're fully hoarded, right, you've got a shitload of enemies, you know, all the way around you. Well, with this weapon, you can still deal with a dog that's coming at you, or a flamer, or a trapper, you know, whatever. And not all enemies will stick out above the horde, and you know, that's not going to be an issue here. So absolutely S tier weapon. If you really don't want to use a revolver, the only other option I would consider is a braced autogun because it performs similarly. It's just going to be less precise, and you know, the kill time is going to maybe be a bit longer. So it still pierces, right? You can see that went through 2 enemies there. That one as well, right? And so it's got a little bit of piercing. And then it also has stagger, and so those 2 things combined with the rate of fire means that even though you know, it will take multiple bullets to go through and reach your target, you will be able to reach your target through a horde. which I think, is it just called the Autogun, the other weapon? I don't have it, but it can't do that, and so that's why I wouldn't recommend it. Just for consistency. If you have to wait for an enemy to be like inside your asshole to be able to kill it, then it's too late. And with these weapons, you don't have to wait. Um, so that's that. Let's talk about the Curios. 17% toughness on all three if you can. Do not grab health for this build. Toughness is just so much better because we have so much toughness damage reduction, and also we have so much toughness regen. So what that means is if instead of sitting at 100 toughness, you can sit at, I don't know, 150, it's more like 140 to 200, something like that. Then when you take a hit for like 50 toughness, instead of losing a third, you're just losing a quarter of your toughness, which means that instead of taking 30% of your next hit as health damage, you're only taking 25%. It also means that when we regenerate toughness, since it's done as a percentage, we're regenerating more toughness per second, as a value. And so it all just works really well together to make you a lot more resilient on this build in particular when you grab toughness. So you really want toughness. We don't need stamina either because we already have a lot of stamina. The reason this build runs out of stamina is because we're running around all over the place. So it's not going to matter how much stamina you have. What matters is how much stamina you are able to regenerate. So that's going to be one of the perks we want. We want stamina regen, but that's the third most important perk. The first most important, I would say, is damage resistance gunners. The second is toughness regen speed, and the third is stamina regen. Um, in that order. You can guarantee with a blessing that you can get two perks you want, and so really the stamina regen is a nice to have. You can replace it with block efficiency, but stamina regen is a lot better than block efficiency. So that's kind of the order, right? Damage resist gunners, toughness regen, stamina regen, and then block efficiency. Those are the ones you want. Corruption resistance might be alright, but we don't need to worry too much about that on this build either. For talents, we've got two different versions of this. So let's start with this one. We move over to this side. Backstab damage, 30% crit chance from this. The way it works is every time you crit on an enemy, it's going to apply one stack of bleed. This does stack up. So for example, if you're fighting a boss with this alone, eventually the boss will have the max bleed stacks. And then every time you attack an enemy that is bleeding, you get a stack of a buff, which gives you 10% crit chance per stack. So this is 30% crit chance. Then we get toughness on dodge, and we get toughness damage reduction when we crit. So the more we crit, the more bleeds, the more we crit, also the less damage we take. So that's quite nice. Over here on the left, we get a damage buff. Now with the combat blade, we have low cleave. So really we can only cleave up to 3 enemies, and with this here we're gonna only get 15% damage, but it's still nice. This is really good, 2.5% per second, especially when we're out in the open and we don't have any allies near us. This is really helpful. This is really helpful as well. And so keep in mind we also have second wind. So these three things combine into making us quite, tanky, no matter what, without even being in coherency. We can regenerate a lot of toughness. Then we grab the Stun Storm grenade. Now, the Immolation grenade is a better grenade in my opinion. It's definitely a more offensive, this is a very defensive, although it can be used offensively as well. But the Immolation grenade does so much damage that instead of stunning enemies, you might as well just kill them. The problem is we just don't really benefit as much from this part of the skill tree. So that's why I've gone this way. Um, so coming further down, we get more crit damage and weak spot damage on dodge. Dodges also give us toughness back, so there's a bit of synergy there. That's nice. Until death, we have a ability where if we die, instead of dying, we go invulnerable for 5 seconds, and then we heal 25% of our health back. And this can happen every 2 minutes. So as long as you don't die more than every 2 minutes, you will never die. So that's really fucking strong. Benediction is another 15% toughness damage reduction. And so this plus this, Enduring Faith, plus this little point here, gives us 70% toughness damage reduction, which is awesome. Coming further down, Fury of the Faithful, this is going to give us toughness back. It's going to give us attack speed. And it's going to guarantee our next hit is a crit. And it's going to increase the damage by 25%. And it's also awesome mobility, right? Because it's a great charge. It can go pretty far. While you're charging, you count as evading. So if you've got gunners shooting at you, it won't do any damage. And so this is really, really strong for the playstyle we're going for here. And again, if you want to see how all of this works, you can just, click into the description. I'll have a link to some gameplay, and you can see you don't use it only for the charge, but you also don't use it only for the damage. It's quite versatile. You can use it just because you want your toughness back. You can use it just for the attack speed. You can use it just for the charge. You can use it to one-tap some enemies. It's just a very, very strong ability. You can even just use it to get safety. So this is really good. And then we get a second charge here. Now, the reason we grabbed this over Shroud Field really comes down to the fact that we get a second charge, and also the fact that it's less expensive for us to grab this than to go over here and grab that. I do think Shroud Field is, great too. The downside is it doesn't give us a persistence buff, whereas this does, right? We still get 20% attack speed here. So to me, this is better. And it's also cheaper in terms of points, so it's nice. Then we come down. This is not amazing for us with the combat blade. It's just a bit more stagger. And then let's talk about these 2 points here. So more attack speed and more damage. This is going to be a nice damage buff. And then we grab Invocation of Death. So this is what makes the whole build work, especially for the combat blade. If not for this, I would definitely recommend grabbing the Crusher instead. But every time we crit on an enemy, this is going to give us 1.5 seconds of cooldown reduction. So if in one swing you crit on 3 enemies, you're going to get 4.5 seconds of cooldown reduction just then, which is crazy. And with a weapon like the Combat Blade, which we can reach 100% crit chance on, and the crazy attack speed it has, well, we can get some insane cooldown reduction. So yeah, that synergized with Fury of the Faithful means you can charge in, beat the shit out of your enemies, and then charge onto the next group, beat the shit out of them, charge onto the next group. And every time you do this, especially if you're on like the back line of the enemies and they've got shotgunners shooting at you, gunners shooting at you, shooters shooting at you, you're gonna be losing a lot of toughness. We are dodging around, all the time and stuff, but even so, you'll lose a lot of toughness. And that's also why we're grabbing the damage resistance gunners here. But since your cooldown is going to be so low with this, we can use this to keep our toughness up, which is nice. And that is also why we've got so much toughness regen built in. It's also going to help you close your ground because this is a build where you're safest when you're in melee range of some enemies, even if other enemies are shooting at you. As long as you have enemies near you, you're safe. It's when there's no one left that you're in danger. So yeah, this is ultra powerful when combined with this. It's also ultra powerful when combined with Shroud Field, right? But yeah, it's just a very powerful ability. And then this just gives us more crit chance. The way this works is we get a buff every time an enemy dies within 25 meters of us. It doesn't have to die from us, anyone can kill it. But as long as it's close enough, we'll get a stack of a buff. And also, if we do a crit, we get a stack of that buff too. And once that buff reaches 25 stacks, we get a different buff, I guess, or it like procs the buff, which gives us 25% crit chance because we grabbed this as well. And that just is how we reach the crazy levels of crit chance. So we get 30% there. We get 25% here. Then if we look at our stats, let me switch back to the knife. We have a base of 20% with the knife, which you could have, 25% if you had grabbed the perk like I recommended. So that would be, what, 80%? Yeah, that's 80% base crit chance. Well, not base, but with all of those buffs. And then with Riposte, you would reach 100% crit chance. So that's, pretty awesome. If you could drop the 5% crit chance perk, but you need to keep in mind that part of how the build works is that the more you crit, the more you crit, right? So if we don't have crits to trigger this in the first place, then we're not going to be getting this buff, which is how we get 30% of our crit chance. And likewise, if we don't crit here, it's going to take us a lot longer to reach those 25 stacks to get this buff. So you really want that baseline crit chance to be high so that we can proc these more easily and, have a better uptime on them. So I do still recommend grabbing the 5% here. And yeah, that is the build. Now let me show you the other approach. The other approach really is focusing on giving us the immolation grenade. Now it does do other nice stuff for us. So you see here more damage on our ranged weapon. You do need to be pretty far away from enemies for this to happen, but it will give you breakpoints. You can one tap quite a few more enemies with this. This, if you grab Maniac, damage against Maniac on your Revolver, and you land a crit, you can one tap Trappers, but they do need to be pretty far away. And then, this is also a 20% damage buff, so that's pretty good too. So, it's not the worst branch, it's just not as good as the other one in my opinion. But then we grab the immolation grenade. And then down here we do lose 10% of our attack speed, which is a shame. I'll show you what the immolation grenade looks like real quick. So I'm just gonna spawn a few enemies here, so we'll get one of him, one of him, one of him. We'll put a mutant. He's gonna survive. I mean, I think we get the idea, right? The dog will die, I'm pretty sure. The bulwark will die. Now he's gonna survive. That's enough. Wait. Do I have the right build on? Yes, I do. Alright, so you throw your grenades. It blows up. Now it's applying stacks of burning. You press F, and now it starts melting shit. You can see the kill feed there, and then you press F again. and that's it. And so it didn't actually kill the mutant. I thought he would die, but I mean these enemies are all, well, he's a one tap no matter what. The Mauler is inside of the Ogryn. He's really not close to death. The Mauler is pretty close though. It's just that we can't reach him. Let's get rid of him. And the Mauler should be one tap as well. Yeah. So that's, you know, why the grenade is so strong, is it just, you could have anything there, right? Any amount of crazy shit in that horde, and it is all just gonna die. Whereas, you know, the stun one is, there's no way, even in the best case scenario, that your outcome will be that good, right? So that's why I prefer immolation. Um, but your mid game is going to be stronger with this part of the branch, I feel. And, you know, keep in mind you also get the attack speed increase. So that is it. Um, yeah, if you've got any questions, just leave a comment and let me know if you know, how you find the build. Please don't, you know, use other gear and then say, oh, it's a bad build, it doesn't work with this other gear. The gear matters, right? The build is designed around the gear I recommended. Um, and yeah, hopefully you enjoy it. Thanks for watching.